Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And there indeed is Lizzie Yarnold all over the front pages after that great win. It's the time of year we all pretend to understand what's going on at the Winter Olympics, and the women's skeleton, which is basically a supersonic tea tray, but a great achievement by her. They've also got the story about Jeremy Corbyn and the Czech agent. I should say that this has been comprehensively and absolutely denied as lies and rubbish by all the politicians concerned, and it does seem, reading through it, fairly thin. The Sunday Times there has got Kerry Mulligan, one of the actors, campaigning against sexual harassment in the workplace, but also a very, very important interview we'll talk more about with Damien Hines. He's on the programme talking about tuition fees, grammar schools, faith and much more in the education system. And then we've got the editor of the Sunday Express, political editor of the Sunday Express here, and we have her story about Theresa May's speech in Munich, her Brexit pledge, no going back. We'll again be talking more about that. There is Lizzie Yarnold again. The Observer has a different kind of story, Lizzie Yarnold again, but also shock figures on the dire state of Britain's prisons. They say overcrowded, overfunded, drug-infested and violent. Are Britain's prisons on the edge of meltdown? We've talked about that story on this programme before. And finally, the Mail on Sunday, the interview there with Joe Cox's widower. A very sad story, actually, given what that man has gone through. It's, whatever else it is, it's a sad, sad story for him. Let's turn to today's papers, and let's start off, shall we, with Theresa May and her speech in Munich.
Yes. Interesting speech in Munich, because it was a bit of a game of two halves in that she had pre-prepared what she was calling the first of this roadmap to Brexit, laying out what Britain would like to collaborate with on Europe and what we want to diverge with. And
Camilla, I should say you were there.
I was
there. You were there in the room.
Snowy Munich, got home a little later than planned because the heavens opened and it snowed very heavily. But yes, I was there in the room, right above from the balcony, took this photograph of Christine Lagarde, who rather snubbed the speech and walked out halfway through, but we know that she's an arch Europhile and probably wasn't liking what she was hearing. Neither were some of the delegates in the crowd, and so our splash is about not only Mrs May's vision for our security arrangements of the future, but also the fact that she had to combat a number of quite hostile questions from delegates, essentially saying, look, if you want such a deep and special partnership with us, and if we're so great, why have you left in the first place? Another delegate asking why that she just didn't have another second referendum, because of course in Europe, when there were disagreements over the constitution, made them vote again, and she was unequivocal in her response to that, and actually quite stateswoman-like in saying, no, we don't just keep on voting until we get the answer that we want. There will be no second referendum. We are leaving. We're leaving the ECJ. So, yes, basically, I think probably manna from heaven for the Brexiteers in the party.
You were in the room watching. Nicola Sturgeon was watching, presumably, on her television set, Joanna, and she has also intervened.
Indeed,
in all of this.
and the First Minister has said May has put party before country when it comes to national security in an interview with the Sunday Herald in Scotland. And, of course, she's absolutely right about that. Probably why Christine Lagarde left the room yesterday was she got bored with the speech because there was absolutely no detail. It's all aspirational stuff from Theresa May. But the time has come for some detail to be given on how we're going to have this important, lasting relationship on security. It's a bit like Boris Johnson's speech earlier this week, a complete lack of any detail and any engagement with how we're going to go forward here. And also, very interestingly, no reference whatsoever to these economic assessments that I and some other MPs have seen, which very much tally with the picture painted by the Scottish Government in the document they published last month, showing that Brexit in any scenario means a massive hit for GDP across the UK and job losses.
But of course, we will get more detail quite soon now, because the government's having this great Chequers summit. They're all going to discuss what they're going to, and then we are promised they're going to come out and tell us, well, almost everything, not quite everything.
Well, it should do, but equally, I think when you look at Boris, he was there to create a vision, and often he's creating the colour around it and not necessarily the details about of the hour.
The time for vision is past. It's the time for detail now. We're going to have to reach a deal by October. We're going to have set out our store for the parameters of that deal in March, April. And none of these speeches we've had so far have put any meat on the bones whatsoever.
Let's do some more politics. Let's do Henry Bolton, who was on the show last week, and when I said to him, are you still in love with your girlfriend, and he basically said he was, then I thought that's probably over for him as UKIP leader, and so it has proved. He's been UKIPpered, according to the Mail on Sunday.
Yeah, well, I think the problem for UKIP is that they've become an irrelevance because the party of hard Brexit now is the Conservative Party that's determined to take Britain over the cliff edge. So I think the problem for UKIP is that they're no longer relevant. OK,
let's turn now to Damien Hinds, who certainly is relevant because he's Education Secretary, and he's given a really interesting interview to the Sunday Times. Not as interesting as the interview he's going to give shortly on that chair, but not bad.
Just a rehearsal for your big interview, Andrew.
Exactly.
But in this, he's pointing out that actually things do need to change when it comes not only to tuition fees, but also university education in the whole. Some really interesting proposals here, which I think will be music to the ears of parents and grandparents who are perhaps struggling with the idea of fees and how much it costs to send a child to university, and also the notion that perhaps there's an idea that university students spend too much time there. People who are doing an hour a week of classics could perhaps condense it into a couple of years. So he's talking about sandwich courses, he's talking about commuter courses whereby children live at home and commute locally to university to study. He's also interestingly taking on this mantle that Theresa May introduced during the election campaign of T-levels and an alternative to university, and saying that actually children should be encouraged where necessary to take technical education that isn't necessarily a degree.
This country is very, very resistant to giving that kind of vocational training the kind of status that it's got on the continent, in Germany, in Holland and other places.
But there should surely
be a problem with it.
It is a problem because I think parents are thinking children must go to university, otherwise they're going to fail in life. And actually, if there's an alternative narrative and an alternative training that's given a parity of esteem, then that's a very good thing. Equally as well, I thought an interesting piece in the part of the piece is that he's making his approach very teacher-centric, i.e. he does not want to anger the teaching unions, and that's not been easy for previous Conservative education secretaries.
How different is the debate in Scotland at the moment, Joanna?
Well, it's totally different because, of course, what Damien Hinds is coming up against is the reality that students are leaving university in England with a massive debt burden, facing huge house prices and stagnant wages under the Tories. In Scotland, we don't have university tuition fees, so students aren't facing that challenge. Students leave a university with their degree without a huge debt. The SNP government has built more affordable housing, over 30,000 affordable homes, and more to be built in the future. And my colleagues in Holyrood are very much pushing for a living wage across Scotland as well. OK, well, let's turn to foreign affairs and President Donald Trump and this extraordinary investigation by Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. And he's now indicted a whole series of quite well-connected Russians as being involved in the thing. And overnight, of course, sitting in the Oval Office bedroom, he's been tweeting again. What's he been saying?
Naturally, yes, as he consumes a Big Mac and a couple of Diet Cokes, or perhaps full-fat Cokes, he has been tweeting, and he's basically said, and let's bear in mind that he's courted a lot of criticism this week because of his Republican alliances with the gun lobby, in blaming the FBI for missing some of the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter from last week.
He's saying, quite extraordinary.
This is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion. Get back to the basics and make us all proud. There may well be a legitimate criticism of the FBI not taking seriously complaints about this boy from the past, and indeed classmates were being sent WhatsApp messages suggesting that he wanted to go out and kill people. We were discussing this, weren't we, backstage, Joanna, and saying, well, goodness me, there must be a lot of troubled youngsters in America who are making such claims about guns. But to bring the FBI into it in this regard and openly criticise them...
It's for his blatant political advantage. You know, he's using the senseless murders of these innocent young people to his own political advantage to try and diss the FBI because he doesn't like one of the investigations.
You've got the Sunday Mirror there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story here in the Sunday Mirror that just 47 miles from the Florida massacre, there's a huge gun show going on over the weekend offering free entry to children. Now, of course, there are troubled teenagers the world over, but the difference is that in America, they can get hold of as much guns and as much ammunition as they want. That's what Trump should be focusing on. What's he going to do about that?
Am I right in saying that there's some suggestion that he was mentally disturbed, this kid? And one of the changes that the administration in America has made is to make it easier for people who've got those kind of mental histories to get guns.
Which is insane. I mean, I think Brits find it insane that you can walk into a shop and buy a semi-automatic weapon anyway. Obviously, Trump has been rightfully condemned last week for talking about mental health issues, but not seemingly making the correlation between the fact that, at the end of the day, the Republican campaign is largely propped up by the NRA.
I mean, this tweet is just so typical of Trump, isn't it? You know, it's just no no statesmanlike behaviour whatsoever.
We're beginning to run out of time. Can we very quickly point out that the Oxfam UN story is carrying on, rumbling all the way through today's papers?
Rumbling on. A colleague of mine has pointed out the fact that the UN now is facing its own abuse scandal. There are apparently 612 outgoing cases. In the last year alone, there have been incidents involving, I think, 21 complaints of abuse against children, with 7 claiming their abuser has left them pregnant. Right. The tip of the iceberg quote once again springs to mind.
And very, very quickly, the supersonic tea tray.
Yeah, I mean, this is just fantastic. 3 medals for the United Kingdom yesterday. All young women participating in what I consider to be absolutely terrifying sports, but shining in them. And you can only applaud their aplomb. And I think it's great for women in sport to see the medals coming from female athletes.
Very nice to end on an up story. Thank you both very much indeed.
And Parliament itself to have its arrogance, flaws and frailties exposed in all their tawdriness. And a newer institution, the devolved government in Northern Ireland, has come perilously close to total collapse. Oh, and Henry Bolton is UKIP's leader no more, his members having decided that he was, well, just a bit too interesting, even for them. Oh dear, Allegra Screeny, where have all the heroes gone?
My heroism is getting up at 5 in the morning for you, Robert Peston.
And you are my hero.
There we go. Now, look, the story that has run and run this week is the idea that Jeremy Corbyn once, in 1984, met a Czech spy, didn't know it at the time. Well, the Telegraph, the Sunday Telegraph's picking up with this allegation this morning. This time, that Czech agent claiming that 15 Labour MPs met spies. Labour Party's been quick to trash this story this morning. In a nutshell, John McDonnell's calling this Telegraph lies. But the main story today is what on earth the government is going to do on tuition fees. The Sunday Times have the first interview with the Cabinet Minister in charge. Our guest later, Justine Greening, was made way, got out of the way to make way for this guy. So now we learn from this piece that they're looking at cuts in fees for those doing social sciences and perhaps a delay in the repayment of when you would pay back your fees, and so on and so on. Now, it was Corbyn's ditching of tuition fees during the election that meant he did pretty well with 18 to 24-year-olds. Have a look at this. The massive, great big red swoosh of 62% of the number of 18 to 24-year-olds that backed Labour versus a meagre 27% for the Conservatives. The question is, will action on tuition fees be enough to get back some of this red over to the Conservative blue? Because this graph was shared on social media this week. It is the number of 25 to 34-year-olds that own their own home. Back in the day, in 1996, some 55% own their own home. Quite a lot. I'm surprised it was that much back then, but now it has, if not fallen off a cliff, then tumbled down a hill, because look at this. It's now just over a third. It's much lower. So the question is, will today's movement, Robert, on tuition fees be enough?
Well, joining me now are Labour's Jess Phillips and the former Tory Minister David Willett, who now chairs the influential think tank, the Resolution Foundation. Jess, if I could start with you. We heard this morning that Brendan Cox, husband of your great friend, the murdered MP Jo Cox, has stepped down from the charities that he helped to create after she was killed following allegations that he behaved inappropriately in 2015 with female staff at Save the Children. Was he right to stand back from these charities?
Yeah, I think that what Brendan has done this morning and the statements that have been released over the weekend show that he's willing to face the things that he may have done, or that certainly how they've made people feel. And what he, I'm sure, never wanted to do was to drag any of the work that those of us who wish to carry on the work of Jo through any sort of controversy. And so it's absolutely the right thing to do.
I mean, he said that his behaviour was inappropriate. Can you tell us any more about what you think it was, as it were?
I mean, none of us know the absolute details, and I wouldn't like to speculate, but I think that the truth of the matter is we live in an era where men are going to have to address the behaviour, both previously and in the future. And what I want to see, I don't like this idea that we just switch off our feelings about people. I love Brendan, he's my friend, his family are friends with my family. But the fact of the matter is that it's not enough just to say, oh, I'm sorry. You have to show how you're going to change the way you are in the future. And I think Brendan, more so than many I've seen in this area, is actually trying to do that.
Although very powerful, what Jess said, I want to slightly move on to a different issue, which is in the Sunday Times today. We had an interview with the new Education Secretary, Damon Hines. Now, the system of funding universities is one you're closely associated with. He is mooting a number of possible reforms, including differential fees for different courses, so cheaper fees for some courses, those he thinks are sort of somehow less beneficial to the economy or to the individual. Do you think that's the right way to go?
Well, lots of us tried to get differential fees. I tried to get differential fees, but when you've got a generous graduate repayment scheme, the students don't pay up front. The student isn't paying 7,000 or 8,000 or 9,000. They are thinking of the repayment term, so it doesn't affect their behaviour what the fees are. And also, I have to say,
why doesn't it affect their behaviour what the fees are?
Because it's not a payment up front. What you're going to be doing subsequently is paying out income tax.
Because you pay it off over such a long time, you don't think students, or those who are thinking about becoming students, you don't think they think about what they're paying?
The very thing that makes the system fair and progressive, namely nobody pays up front. You pay back through income tax at the rate of 9% over a threshold when you're an adult earner. That very fact, which is a deliberate design feature, is why people are not sensitive to the exact level of the fee. And of course you could...
So I could just pick up one thing on this. So do you think that actually the government is making a mistake by focusing on this at all? Because many people would say your party cannot ever win on this argument against the Jeremy Corbyn policy, which is no fees at all. And given you're not going to go down the route of no fees at all, why bother to raise it? Why bother to raise it?
Yeah, well, I think we've got a system which is basically fair. Graduates in general do earn more, and if they're earning more, they should pay back. And it seems to me from what Damien is saying that he also recognises the strength of this system. I actually think the bit that isn't working is the vocational training. It's the opportunities for the other half of young people who don't go to university, and I hope this tertiary review focuses on helping them rather than focusing on the university bit, where we have actually got now proper funding behind the education of young people at university and then not paying up front. And it would be really dangerous if we reduce the unit of resource for the educating people at university, because that is something they would notice. They would feel that.
So just to be clear, I think you are simply saying that the university bit of this review is just straightforwardly a mistake.
Well, I think there are specific changes to make. I rather agree with the Treasury Committee's report today. I think interest rates are a political hot potato, and it'd be great to do something about that. Well, I'd like to see more cash for students at university, if it was possible to afford bringing some maintenance grant in. Right. Those are the things, the adjustments I'd make.
Yeah, let's take a look at what's leading the Sunday papers. Starting with the Mail on Sunday, it leads the tearful confession of Brendan Cox, the widower of the murdered MP Joe Cox. Mr Cox has resigned from 2 charities amidst allegations of sexual harassment. An investigation by The Observer has revealed that 68% of Britain's prisons are providing unsatisfactory standards, while 2 in 5 are deemed to be unacceptably unsafe. Science and humanities students at universities could be charged different tuition fees to ensure value for money. That's according to the Education Secretary, Damien Hines, speaking to the Sunday Times. The Sunday Telegraph leads on that claim by a former Czechoslovak spy that 15 Labour MPs, including Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, shared information with Eastern Bloc countries during the Cold War. And the Sunday Express reports on Theresa May's insistence that there will be no second EU referendum. Joining me to discuss all that, the former Deputy Chair of UKIP, Suzanne Evans, the businesswoman and Managing Director of PetXI, Fleur Sexton, and the co-founder of the anti-Brexit campaign, Our Future, Our Choice, Femi Oluwole. Lovely to see you all this morning. Let's get straight on in, and Suzanne, strangely enough, we're going to talk UKIP.
I had to talk about this, didn't I? We had a lovely day in Birmingham yesterday that a lot of us would rather have not have been there. I really wish Henry Bolton had resigned. I predicted right from the start that he was going to lose this vote of no confidence, and sure enough, it happened yesterday. But we had to go through this expensive rigmarole where we all had to pile to Birmingham. And so now I'm afraid UKIP is going to be looking for yet another leader. I think we've had 7 since the EU referendum, since Nigel Farage stood down. So what's going to happen next? Well, Nigel Farage has shown himself to be singularly useless when it comes to choosing leaders of UKIP apart from himself. He chose Diane James, who didn't last 2 weeks. He chose Paul Nuttall, and he chose Henry Bolton. So I think it's time for either Nigel to come back, because he might not be very good at choosing subsequent leaders, but he's a pretty good leader himself, and I think he could really improve our poll ratings again. So I think he either needs to come back or keep out of the next leadership vote.
So are you, I don't know. I mean, I have to ask the question. Are you going to run?
Well, I might very well. Yeah, let's see. As I say, I think Nigel helped sort of create this mess in a way, so it'd be quite nice if he came back and sorted it out, because we do know that Nigel is absolutely capable of getting, enthusing voters to the point of getting at least 12.5% in the polls, which is what we got at the general election in 2015. And I think this government does need a bit of an impetus and a push to try and get on with Brexit and get a proper, clean Brexit. And I think Nigel Farage back at the helm of UKIP could be that. But end this dance of the seven veils, Nigel. Will you, won't you, might do, I might not. You know, just either come back and lead us or get out of the way and let somebody else get on with the job.
I mean, Fleur, from your perspective, what's the role of UKIP, given that actually they got the EU referendum, they won the EU referendum? I mean, what's left to do?
Well, I think it's about providing an alternative view, and I think it's very important that people are given choice. Very, very important that people see a wide spectrum of opportunities and different things that can happen within a community, because at the end of the day, my interest in particular is getting young people to have excellent skills, both for the economy to be strong and also for the community to be strong. So I think choice is very, very important. And what really comes across for me in all of this is that leaders have to serve. Yeah. So I think the focus for the new leader has got to definitely be on somebody who can serve. Yeah. Definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, Femi, you're all for a plurality of voices in the political sphere, aren't you? Oh, no, you're wearing a I don't want Brexit T-shirt.
Yeah, well, on UKIP, I'm actually really grateful to them. Not for the musical chairs with the leadership, but that's just a bit of fun. But just for how they've made people like for the job of people like me so much easier. I mean, if you take the things they said before the referendum and the things they've said after the referendum, for example, you had Nigel Farage who said there is nothing we can do to stop unlimited numbers of EU migrants coming here and enjoying the same rights and privileges as all the rest of us. And then after the referendum, in a conversation he had with me, where I pointed out that under EU law, if you can't come here without a job unless you have enough money to not become a burden and have medical insurance, you can't be a burden on the NHS, he said, in theory, Femi, you're right. In theory, under European treaties, there are restrictions that can be placed. So they've made it so much easier for people like me to say, hang on, you were sold this, you were told that it's the EU's fault that we have unrestricted immigration, and in fact it's the UK government's fault. And they've made it so much easier for me to say, hang on, maybe we should think again. Maybe we should have a say on our future. Maybe we should take back control of this process.
Fleur, I want to actually go to your story next, in the Sunday Times. And this is a hunt for the missing children. These are children that are being homeschooled.
Yes, that's right. So there are 45,000 young people who are being homeschooled, but they've done a survey of 188 councils, and it actually looks more like there's about 80,000 young people who are being homeschooled. Now, I think this is excellent that there's the opportunity of homeschooling, because it's all about parental choice. It's very important in life that young people have good choices, and I think young people can actually find lots of different paths to where they need to be and fulfilling their potential. The thing that they're concerned about, the reason they've got this bill that they're trying to put through, is because some of these young people have never been on any sort of list, so they're unknown to the local authorities. That's the key thing.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, just looking at the article here, Suzanne, I mean, it is entirely unacceptable that local authorities do not know how many children are being homeschooled. I mean, councils say 45,000. Home education groups say that, what, the best part of 100?
80,100. I find this really shocking, that children who have never gone to school are not counted in these statistics. That is horrific. We have a situation where, in theory, there are children in this country that we have no idea whether they're being educated or not, no idea whether they're having the opportunities that every child should have in this country, and we don't know about them. I certainly wouldn't want to see the UK go the same way as some other countries in Europe, Germany, Sweden, Greece, Holland, where homeschooling is illegal. I think that's the wrong way. I think parents need to be able to have that choice. But yeah, I think an annual checkup and for all children to be registered, I don't think that's at all unreasonable. My concern, if anything, is the resources of local authorities to be able to take on these additional powers. We know their budgets are being cut to the bone. I have some concerns about that. But for goodness sake, to protect our children, we need to know what's happening to them.
I mean, Femi, if we don't know how many children are being homeschooled, how certain can we be that they're receiving an appropriate, decent education?
We can't be. I mean, I believe that it's every parent's right to choose whether or not they take their child to school or whether or not they want to homeschool them. But they're missing out on a lot of social interaction and a lot of skills that they should be developing in school. And I actually agree with you, Ms. Evans. It's important to make sure that communities put the resources in to make sure we know where these children are. We know they're getting a decent education. It's just so vital.
Well, let's turn then to your story in The Observer, and it's to deal with the launch tomorrow of this review of the financing of university education. Their take on it is that cutting tuition fees would be a subsidy to Tory voters.
Well, right now we have a situation where UK students have the highest student fees of any country in the world. We actually exceeded America, which I didn't think was possible. It's those from the poorest families, the lowest income backgrounds, that actually end up with more debt, because those from richer families simply pay off their student loans. Given that most people from low income families never actually pay off their student loans, cutting the cap on tuition fees from 9,000 to 6,000 after they tripled it before, that just means that richer families will have less to pay. It only benefits the richer families, and yet once again, the Tories are screwing over young people. I mean, it's all about their next steps. If you're finishing school, you want to know that your next steps are going to be secure. You want to know that you're going to be able to find a job. You want to know that you're going to have uni places. And they're pursuing Brexit knowing that it's going exactly against the wishes of young people, which is going to make those next steps a hell of a lot harder. If you want a decent job, you need to have an economy that's thriving, that's producing the opportunities for those jobs. And that's why I created Our Future, Our Choice, because young people are the most affected by this.
I mean, Suzanne, just on that, I mean, there is a logical point that is being made by Femi and others, that because they're going to be around for a lot longer than you or I, they have more of a stake in this. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I loathe tuition fees. I went to university, I got a full grant. I would never have gone to university had I not had that, because my family couldn't afford it. I was the first person in my family to go to university, and so I benefited from that education. I now have a daughter who's in a very different boat indeed, and she's just started to pay back her student loan because she's just got over that threshold, so that's loads of her income out the door straight away. UKIP's view is very much that we should abolish tuition fees. We'd like to abolish them altogether, and we think that's financially possible, but certainly for science, technology, education, medicine and maths, all those subjects that we really need people to get on board with and skills that we're short of. But I also think universities got to be more responsible. It's this one-size-fits-all. They all charge the same amount of money, but with very, very different outcomes. I'd like to see a league table of university outcomes published, so students have the ability to judge whether a course is going to get them a decent job or not, and in what timescale. I think that's fair. They're charging lots of money. They should be accountable just like any businesses.
Guys, I am really sorry. We have run out of time. We will have to leave it there. Suzanne, Fleur, Femi, thank you all so much for being with us. Appreciate it.